Going back to ancient stories, it's been a while, obviously a month, since we looked at the last one. But there's this very quirky story in the book of Numbers that I absolutely love about a donkey who has more common sense than the people around him. And I have no doubt about the authenticity or the historicity of the story. I think it's true. I think it happened. Yet as Moses tells the story, he tells it in such a way that the smartest person in this series of conversations appears to be the donkey. And everything we can think about that donkeys represent is the contrast that this stupid beast is speaking truth greater than those who are conspiring against God. And there are a couple of features of this story that make it unique, not apart from just the donkey. And I really struggled if I should preach this one from the King James, because you know how the King James translates donkey, and I thought I could really have fun with that this morning, but I decided against that, and we'll just go with donkey. But what makes this story jump out is right there in the middle of the book of Numbers, or towards the end of the book of Numbers. As Israel is moving out of Egypt, they're on the process of Exodus, they're in the wilderness. Moses has received the 10 Commandments, he's been up and he's back down the mountain. And unlike the book of Leviticus and the book of Deuteronomy, that gives great instruction about the law of God, we have this story about a donkey. And it sits there in the middle, or 2/3 of the way of the book of Numbers, and you got to ask yourself, why in the world did Moses tell this story? This is not a story about Moses. He is not a primary character. It's not even a story so much about the Israelites, although they are the trigger to this story. This is a story about people that are complete strangers. Strangers initially to one another, and strangers, in a sense, to Israel. And yet, in the wisdom of God, under the inspiration of the Spirit of God, this story is included right towards the end, 2/3 of the way through the book of Numbers, and then sets a stage as a warning for what's going to happen in the last part of the book of Numbers. But it's just, if you read through the Bible in a very linear fashion and you just kind of look at the words and don't think about it, you're going to miss that little bump in the road. This is like a speed bump. And you have to stop and say, why in the world would Moses tell the story of a donkey in the middle of explaining the law? So it's in Numbers 22 to Numbers 24. We can't go through it verse by verse, word by word, or we would be here till 2:30 this afternoon. So I'm going to give some summary, a couple of hooks to hang the story on so we can understand the big structure. And then I am going to look at a couple of texts specifically towards the end of the story. So first of all, the number 3 is used by Moses as he tells this story. He does things in threes, and that is in part a literary device, and that is in part to help us remember. So here are the 3 things that happen in this story in general. First of all, a guy named Balak, and we'll talk about who these people are in a little bit, he recruits a guy named Balaam. And Balaam is the guy who owns the donkey. That's the first part of the story. It happens in chapter 22. Next, Balaam, the guy who owns the donkey, is confronted by his donkey, and the donkey talks to him. And we'll look at that a wee bit. It's kind of interesting. And then third, Balaam, who is a sorcerer, basically, is hired to pronounce curses on Israel, but ends up pronouncing major blessing on them. So those are the 3 scenes of this story. Balak recruiting Balaam, Balaam having a conversation with his donkey, and then Balaam, instead of cursing Israel, pronouncing blessing upon them. Now, if we were outsiders looking in on this story and you were seeing Balaam talking to his donkey, you would think he was a little bit nuts, unless, of course, you talk to your car, you talk to your motorcycle, or whatever. It's not a normal thing to do. So part of what captures us in this story is that the donkey is not merely personified. He's not just being given human qualities. He is being made to talk by God to communicate a message to Balaam, who is supposed to be a super intelligent guy. So let's look at a little bit of background to this story, because unless we understand the characters in these scenes, the story doesn't make as much sense. So all this that is about to happen in this story of Balak, Balaam, and the talking donkey is because Balak is the king of Moab. Israel has come from Egypt and crossed into the lower part below Mount Sinai. They are just to the west of the Jordan River. Moab, as a country, is on the other side of the Jordan River. The Israelites are they've camped in a plain. It's a very flat area. On the other side of the Jordan River are more hills and I wouldn't really call them mountains, but it's hilly. And the king of Moab, that's his land, is up on those hills, and he can look down and he can see the Israelites. And their fame has preceded them. People know these Hebrews are the ones who have left Egypt having confronted Pharaoh and defeated him. They've already defeated a couple of other nations or been in conflict with a couple of other nations, and they are now here camped at the side of the river. The Moabites, the king of Moab, can look down, and he is intimidated by their presence. So he wants to be proactive. Now, it's important to understand that Moab, or the Moabites as a nation, are related to Abraham. And that's the identity that they have in common. All of these people, except for Balaam, all of these people are related, going back far enough, to Abraham. The Moabites are descendants of Lot. So Lot was Abraham's nephew, and you know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, I'm sure. Lot and his descendants eventually became the Moabites. So there's a little bit of family hostility taking place here between the Israelites and the Moabites. People have long memories about what's going on or what has happened in the past that influences them. Balak is the king of the Moabites. So he's the head honcho. And as he looks at the Israelites camped at his doorstep, and he hears the story of how they came out of Egypt and what has happened to some of the other nations around, he is intimidated, so he calls for help. And he sends a message to a guy named Balaam. And for this story to make sense, you got to understand that Balaam was living in Assyria, about a month's travel by horse away. He is not in Moab. He does not come from the area. He is far away, a month at the speed of horse. That's important because although the text doesn't say it, it tells us that Balaam had a reputation. Just as the Israelites had a reputation, so Balaam has a reputation. And his reputation is as a diviner, a sorcerer, somebody who can pronounce curses on people, who can channel the energy of the gods, of the spiritual whatever is out there, and focus it to cause harm to people or to cause benefit for people. And he has earned an international reputation. How Balak knows about him, we don't know. But somehow this guy named Balaam, living in Assyria near the Euphrates River, his reputation precedes him, and Balak is so concerned that he calls for him to come and help him out. Now, in the first 20 verses of chapter 22, we have the story of Balak contacting Balaam. And the short version is, just because we can't go through it all in great detail, is he sends out a messenger or a diplomatic group probably, to Balaam and says, here's the problem. I want you to come and pronounce a curse on Israel. The first time, Balaam refuses to go. So Balak sends a second, larger group, diplomatic group, to convince him to come. And Balaam finally does come. But the way Moses tells the story is intriguing. In verse 8 of Genesis chapter 22, actually let's start in verse 7 of Numbers chapter 22. It says, the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with fees for divination in their hand. So they took this money, they took the contract cost, and they were ready to give it to Balaam for divination. They wanted him to use his spiritual mystic powers to bring this curse on Israel. And they came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. And he said to them, lodge here tonight, and I will bring word to you as the Lord speaks to me. And so the princes of Moab stayed with Balaam. And God said, who are these men with you? And Balaam said to God, Balak, the son of Zippor, the son of Moab, the king of Moab, has sent me, saying, behold, the people has come out of Egypt and covers the face of the earth. Come and curse them, so I will be able to go fight up against them and drive them out. And God said to Balaam, you will not go, The fascinating thing here is in verse 8, when Balaam is talking, he says, stay, he's talking to the representatives from Moab, stay here tonight, and I will bring word to you as the Lord, notice it's all in caps, Yahweh, speaks to me. Now, was he a follower of Yahweh? Was he a worshiper of the God of Israel? No, absolutely not. But he was a genius in marketing. He understood that if these people want results, I need to appeal to the God of those people, the God of the Israelites, to bring a curse on them. So he invokes the covenantal name of God. Yahweh is going to tell me what to do. In other words, Yahweh is going to betray his people. Trust me, because I've got the power. But then there's this vision and a conversation, and it says in verse 9, and God came to Balaam and said, who are these men with you? Not that God didn't know, but he's having a conversation. But notice the word God is in small letters. It's the word Elohim, and it's a general word for any God. So when God converses with Balaam, Moses records it as just any God, Elohim. But when Balaam tries to posture himself as a person of great spiritual power, he refers to God as Yahweh. Well, Yahweh never gives him that kind of revelation like Moses received. When Moses talks to God, it's always Yahweh talking to Moses. When Balaam talks to God, he's presumptive to use God's name, but it's Elohim. And it's not just a small difference in language and vocabulary. This is Moses' literary device to tell the reader, to tell the people as they heard this story, that he tried to appeal to our covenantal faithful God, the Creator God. I am going to use him. And yet, when God spoke to him, it was just Elohim. It was not with the privilege of covenant relationship. So there's a distinction between the nature of the relationship between the Israelites and this one who is called to bring curses upon them. Fascinating. And that repeats itself in verses 18 and 20. Ultimately, he decides to go. And he is on his way. In verse 20, God came to Balaam, Numbers 22, verse 20, and God came to Balaam at night and said, if the men have come to call you, rise and go with them, but only do what I tell you to do. So Balaam rose in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the princes of Moab. God's anger was kindled against him because he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in his way as his adversary. It's a kind of a curious little twerk here. God says, if you're going to go, go, but you can only say what I'm going to say. But then God gets mad at him that he is going to go. Probably what's happening here is that while God is saying you can go, he is still demonstrating his protective role of his people, and the fact that he does decide to go, he does go, and he is going to produce a curse, God is being protective of his people. And so an action takes place where Balaam and the donkey have a conversation. Again, it's too long to go into all the details, but essentially what happens is 3 times, there's the number 3, Balaam is driving his donkey, riding his donkey. What do you do with the donkey? He's on the donkey, and an angel of the Lord appears. The donkey sees it, and Balaam doesn't. And the irony of this, remember, Balaam is supposed to be a sorcerer, a diviner, a person who could tap into the great spiritual energies of the world and manipulate them. And the donkey sees the angel, and Balaam doesn't. And so the donkey tries to turn off, and Balaam gets mad, and he hits the donkey. And it happens again, and it happens a 3rd time, and Balaam's foot gets caught against the wall, and he's very sore, and he's yelling at the donkey. And finally, God speaks to Balaam, but it's not God. God speaks through the donkey. The donkey says to him, "Can you not see the angel of the Lord?" And Balaam's eyes are finally opened, and he realizes, okay, there's something bigger going on. After all of this time, so remember, it takes a month to get to see Balaam. He says no, so it takes a month for the people to come back. The king says, no, I'm not taking no for an answer. Sends a 2nd delegation, takes them a month to get there. Finally, they come back. So it's about 4 months later from the beginning of this story, even though it's just a few paragraphs in the Bible. Balaam arrives, and he is told, "You are to curse these people." And so he pronounces 3 oracles. Now, there's some debate on this. Some people think the final oracle is actually in 3 sections, so it's oracles 4, 5, and 6. It's hard to say. Regardless, there are at least 3 major oracles, and if that 3rd oracle is broken into 3 sections, so be it. But the message of what Balaam says about God and about his people is the whole point of this story. It's what Moses wanted the Israelites to learn. And he, rather than just sitting down and giving them a lesson in theology, he tells this crazy story about a guy who lives far away who comes riding a donkey. The donkey talks to him. Could you imagine the kids sitting around the campfire at night? And Moses is telling the story. And maybe he used the King James Version, and the kids all giggled that he said that word. And he tells the story and says, "Oh, Uncle Moses, tell us that story again." And night after night after night he tells them. But the purpose of the story is not that this amazing thing happened, that a donkey trumped a so-called sorcerer. The point of the story is the theology that this sorcerer proclaims that is absolutely true about the nature of God and his care for his people, when he was hired to actually place a curse on them. Because obviously the Spirit of God is causing him to say these things. So let's look at these 3 oracles, just a little bit of each one, because again, it's a very long section. But oracle number 1 starts in Numbers chapter 23, verses 7 to 10. "From Aram, Balak has brought me, the king of Moab from the eastern mountains. Come, curse Jacob for me. Come, denounce Israel. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? For from the top of the crags I see him. From the hills I behold him. Behold, a people dwelling alone, not counting itself among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob or number the 4th part of Israel? Let me die the death of the upright, and let my end be like his." And in this poetic, I doubt that Balaam spoke in poetry, but as Moses has recorded it, he's put it into poetic form. He is emphasizing the God who has authority not just over Israel, but the language he's using is that this God, Yahweh, who Balaam in his initial contract negotiations presumed to say, Yahweh will help me, I'll say whatever Yahweh says. Well, he's now saying what Yahweh says, except he's saying it in a form that demonstrates God's covenant relationship with the Hebrews. And the point is that God is not just God of the Hebrews, he is the God of all of creation. Notice how he starts. From Aram, or Assyria, Balak has brought me. This king of Moab has come all the way here to Assyria to get me. And if that area is seen by Yahweh, then how much more is creation subject to his authority? The king of Moab's from the eastern mountains. He says, come and denounce yourself. And then he asks this rhetorical question. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? How can I dare to step out of and exert an authority that doesn't belong to me? Because I'm recognizing Yahweh is the king of all of this creation, and all of this creation is subject to his authority. And he explains that then in more poetic language. For from the top of the crags I see him. From the hills I behold him. Behold, a people dwelling alone, not counting himself among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob? Moses using that phrase that was the promise to Abraham. Your offspring will be innumerable like the stars of the sky, like the sand on the beach. You can't count them. And Balaam is acknowledging these things are true. Now remember, Moab is a descendant of Abraham. He would have known these things. He would have known the promises. The oral traditions would have come down. And rather than cursing, Balaam is reinforcing the history and the care, the providence of God over the Hebrews. Balak is not happy about that, obviously. I paid good money for you to say some nasty things, to put some voodoo on these people. And what are you doing? You're saying nice things about them? That's not good enough. So jump ahead now to verse 18. This is the second oracle. And each one of these oracles gets a little bit longer. And they emphasize a different part of God's engagement with his people, the nature of his covenant. So verse 18 of Numbers 23. Rise, Balak, and hear. Give ear to me, O son of Zippor. God is not a man that he should lie, nor son of a man that he should change his mind. Has he said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken, and will he not fulfill it? God is not like us. God is not like the other gods of the nations around, the ones that Balaam thought he could manipulate as a diviner, as a sorcerer, to check into or plug into their spiritual energy and to use that against them. And in the other religions, the worship of Baal, for example, and the Ashtoreth, there is this concept of the gods in the heavens having battle with one another and constantly looking for leverage, one to use against the other. And that's where Balaam, as a sorcerer, would come in, that he would tap into some kind of spiritual energy and help that god defeat this god and get a favor so this god would bless or would curse. But who is God? He is not a man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should change his mind. Verse 20, behold, I received a command to bless it. He is blessed. I cannot revoke it. Even I am subject to the authority of God. He has not beheld misfortune in Jacob, nor has he seen trouble in Israel. The Lord, their God, is with them. That's the central message of this story. That's why Moses is telling it as they're camped around. They don't know. Remember, the Israelites, they're in their camp down there in the plains beside the Jordan River. They have no idea of the drama taking place up in the hills. They have no idea that the king of Moab has sent for this guy to come and curse them. They have no idea that a donkey has been talking to them. They have no idea that all this stuff is going on. They're down there grumbling. They're grumbling about we don't have enough food. It's always the same food. We don't have enough water. The water is bitter. I want to go back to Egypt. I'm tired of eating manna. We don't have this. We don't have that. Meh, 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 meh. On and on and on it went. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, their neighbors up there in the hills are stressing out. And they are getting a lesson about the theology of who this God, the Creator, is, the God of Israel is. And the Lord, their God, is with them. And a shout of a king is among them. God brings them out of Egypt and is for them like the horns of the wild ox. There is no enchantment against Jacob and no divination against Israel. You can't tap in to the spiritual powers because they don't exist, because their God is the one true God. Now it shall be said of Jacob and Israel, what has God wrought? When we look at this mass, the sea of people, what has God done? Behold a people, as a lioness it rises up, and as a lion it lifts itself, and it does not lie down until it has devoured the prey and drunk the blood of the slain. There's nothing that can be done. And Balak is standing there going, what are you talking about? I'm not telling you, I'm not paying you to say these good things, to reinforce their mindset. Curse them. Balaam can't do it because these are the words of God. This is Moses, by the Spirit of God, as he's recounting this story, and how Moses came to know this story, who knows. But recrafting these events into this form to communicate to the children of Israel. While you're down here complaining about what, this year's styles, has anybody seen Hebrew Vogue? This year's styles are exactly the same as last year's styles. This year's sandals are exactly the same as last year's sandals. And they won't wear out, so we don't have to get new ones. But I'm tired of wearing the same old tunic. I'm tired of eating the same old bread and drinking the same old water. When can we not get some of the stuff like we had back in Egypt? Remember how good it was in Egypt? And they're crazy. In the midst of that, these pagans up in the hills are getting a lesson about God, that He is their God. He brings them out of Egypt. He redeems them and gives them a new life. Then we come to the third oracle, or depending how you want to see it, third oracle in 3 parts, whatever. But it's the third theology lesson. It's quite long, so we're going to drop down to verse 17 of chapter 24. The oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eye is opened, the oracle of him who hears the word of God and knows knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of the Almighty, falling down with eyes uncovered. Finally, Balaam himself, he's humiliated, he's humbled, and he is acknowledging, like Isaiah did, that this is the one true God. I can only say what this God tells me to say. Verse 17, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab, and break down all the sons of Sheth. Edom shall be disposed. Seir also, his enemies shall be disposed. Israel is doing valiantly. The one from Jacob shall exercise dominion and destroy the survivors of the cities. He has this vision looking forward to Messiah. That someday somebody is going to come and exert influence over the entire world, and all things will be subject to him. Now we can debate, and theologians have now for thousands of years, exactly how this will be fulfilled. Obviously it started at Christmas a couple of thousand years ago, although Jesus wasn't born at Christmas, but you know what I mean. With the arrival of Messiah, the birth of Jesus, then his work on the cross, his resurrection, his ascension, in fulfillment of that initial promise to Adam and Eve, that even though you have rebelled, there will be one whose heel will be bruised, but he will crush the snake's head. In the building of that and the hope that that brought eventually, that someday there would be a Messiah that would resolve not just the spiritual issues, but the dysfunction of creation itself. And Balaam, the guy who's supposed to be cursing Israel so the Moabites can exert their political influence over them, now talks about ultimately all the world is going to be subject to somebody who's going to come from this nation called Israel, and he will rule the world. It must have been a real head scratcher. Well, Balak is not happy, as you can imagine, and chews him out, what are you saying? Why are you saying these things? I didn't pay you for this. You can read the story and get all those details. But it closes, the very last verse of chapter 24, Balaam and Balak went on their ways. They went their own way. They separated. The unity, their shared purpose no longer existed, and they went their own ways. Presumably Balaam back to his place a month away, and Balak back up to sit in the throne of Moab. But even in that very brief statement, Moses is teaching a lesson. That these two who came together for nefarious purposes were ripped apart because they were seeking to destroy what God had established in bringing the Hebrews out of Egypt. And now, this God is the God who is caring for them. In Balaam's attempt to tap into the powers of the unseen world with divination and omens and all of that stuff, he ultimately was defeated simply because God used a donkey to talk to him and then put words into his own mouth that would proclaim the goodness and the nature and character of God rather than curse. So why does Moses include this story? What is the primary struggle the Israelites were having, and how does this theology apply to us? Well, if we go to chapter 25, verse 1, there's a little bit of foreshadowing of what is about to happen. And it says, while Israel was staying in Shittim, the men of Israel, began to indulge in sexual immorality with the Moabite women who invited them to the sacrifices of their gods. So despite this lesson, in chapters 22 to 24, Israel begins to participate in idolatry through the nation Moab. And Balaam is described in 2 Peter chapter 2 and in Revelation chapter 2 as the one who led them into this idolatry. And that kind of betrayal, especially in light of what Balaam says and what God has done, and yet the very next chapter starts with, and here's the decision Israel makes. They choose to abandon the God who has been faithful to them. And what Moses is hoping, what his purpose in writing this, is to help the Israelites who have grown up under the religious and worldview of the Egyptians that was polytheistic, and now surrounded by the nations that worship other gods, mostly the Baal and the Asherah, to help them reconstruct their own understanding and perspective of God's created order, who the king is. That even this one from Balaam, of international renown, who could control the deities, a man of sorcery and divination, cannot stand against Yahweh. And yet, Israel, what are you going to do? Well, Moses is up on the mountain. You're going to build a golden calf and worship it. You're going to marry into the families of the Moabites, because after all, we're all part of Abraham's family. Let's just love one another. And they lose their integrity as people of faith and dependence on the one true Creator God. So this story is intended to teach them the dangers of a skewed perspective. There is no power out there except the authority of God Himself. And all things are subject to Him. And they are in covenant relationship. And as God is faithful and loyal to them, as Balaam has said in these oracles, so also they must be faithful and loyal to him. Secondly, I think he's trying to help them understand that doing the routine form is not the same as the function. You can't just go through offering all the sacrifices and jumping through all the spiritual hoops and thinking you have a relationship with God. Authentic worship is more than ceremony and ritual. It's about that relationship, because the God of Israel, Yahweh, creator of heaven and earth, has taken these people and redeemed them from Egypt and created a people of His own. And now they have a responsibility to integrate all of their life as an act of service and loyalty to this one. and simply going through the routines of a regular ceremony and ritual is not enough. It also reminds Israel that Yahweh's reign is over all things. Back in the day, in Israel's day, in Moses' day, gods were very provincial. There was the god of the Moabites and the Amalekites and the Hittites and the whatever otherites. Every nation had their own gods, and the 10 plagues that came against Egypt was a direct confrontation against the 10 major gods of Egypt. They had to learn that their God, Yahweh, holds authority over all of creation. He is not a provincial God. He is the God. Even this guy Balaam, way over there by the Euphrates River, is subject to the God of Israel. Another lesson for them and for us is that God can use anyone. If God can use if God can use a donkey, He can use us. If God can use this stupid beast to talk to Balaam, if God can use Balaam, He can use us. God is not limited by whoever claims to hold power and authority and influence. All things, including the great and the powerful, are subject. The king of Moab was subject to God. Balaam the sorcerer was subject to God. In later years, Nebuchadnezzar was subject to God. Israel is subject to God, and He can use anyone. And these were lessons that Israel failed to learn, failed to integrate into their faith walk, because they were overwhelmed by what they could see, taste, and hear, and distracted by the noise around them. So I don't know how much time passed, but for Moses, as he writes this story, the very next section begins with Israel falling into idolatry as a trap of the Moabites. They didn't need Balaam to pronounce a curse on them. They would choose to rebel against God on their own. So, why do we need this story of a donkey? Because we need to remember the nature and character of our God, who is always engaged, always listening. In a couple of weeks, when we're more or less back into regular routine, halfway through September, towards the end of September, I wanted to set aside a Sunday, and I'm going to call it Slogan Sunday. You take all the little slogans I've come up with and review them. Things like, there is no weather. I like to make these little phrases. Whether they're effective or not, I don't know. Hopefully they stick in your mind. But one of the little slogans that I've shared over the years is, there is no power in prayer. There's power in the one to whom we pray. And just that change in perspective. And that's what that's what this story is about. That we're not about tapping into a greater God that gives us more influence. We're about a relationship with the Creator of God, and we are equally subject to Him, but He is accomplishing His purposes and His plans. I think it's especially important to remember that in this moment in human history, when we look at what's happening over in the Far East, in the Middle East. We look what's happening in global politics. We look what's happening in the cries about climate change. To remember that, well, whatever perspective you may have on those things, God is still working His plan. He is still on His throne. He is still bringing things to the purpose and accomplish the purpose He desires to the end that He has determined from before when He created the world.